Okay, let's talk about RAW and JPEG because a lot of people ask which one should I use and can Lightroom handle them and what's the difference? And to be honest, there's not much difference because no matter whether you have a RAW or JPEG, you can edit anything you want on top of them. The big question is what you're bringing to the table as your original file that you're bringing into Lightroom. And so we got to talk about the difference between RAW and JPEG. Very simply, RAW is the untouched image that your camera takes. JPEG takes that image that you took in the camera and applies a special sauce that you've told it to as far as your settings or your camera settings, whether you want it extra sharp or you want more contrast or white balance and stuff like that, and it goes ahead and bakes that into the image. So think of it as like a lump of dough over here, raw dough versus baked bread. Now you can lay stuff on top of both of those all day long, but your starting point when you bring them into Lightroom is just a little bit different in two areas. And so that's what we're going to talk about. RAW is a bigger file than JPEG, and that's one of the reasons why a lot of people like to shoot with JPEG, because it's a smaller file. But RAW gives you more latitude if you mess up. It's a little more forgiving. However, if you can shoot a great photo, you know there's not that big of a payoff for RAW if you've already got the exposures and stuff like that. So one's not better than the other, they're just different. So let's talk about what happens when we're in the Develop module in Lightroom. So here we have two images. The one on the left is camera RAW. You can see what's going on right over here. It says CR2. And if I hit my right arrow key, I'm just going to jump over, and it's now a JPEG. That's the two different ones. RAW, you notice it's a little duller than the JPEG? That's because the JPEG has baked in some sharpness and some contrast. You may also notice when you're bringing in a RAW file into Lightroom, it'll start out looking pretty good, and then it'll get duller. The reason why that is, and that disappoints me all the time, it's like, oh, that looks pretty good. Oh, it's a little dull. That's because it's showing you the JPEG preview while it's taking time to build the RAW preview. Because it's a bigger file, it's easier and faster to show you a JPEG until the RAW gets ready, and then it shows you the RAW file. So in essence, you're seeing stuff baked in, and then they move that out of the way and show you the original untouched stuff. RAW is assuming that you're going to want to make all the changes and choices, so you're going to figure out a special sauce that's different than the JPEG. So if the RAW is over here, you're saying, I like JPEG, but I want to have full control. That's what RAW does. But here's the thing, even with JPEG, I can tweak it from this point on. Here are the two things that happen. If I'm over here and I'm in camera RAW and I go down to the bottom, I'm going to start at the bottom and we'll go up to white balance in a second. I've got in here camera calibration. I've got all these profiles that I can add to it. So let's say I'm going to go ahead and do camera landscape. And you notice it changes some of this stuff up here. Look at the difference. I go back to camera, was that Adobe standard to begin with? Or camera standard. It's giving you a different recipe of what the special sauce it's going to bake in. And the key to this is it's camera specific. These are taking all the calibrations from Canon to apply to your image. So they will be different for Canon, Nikon, and even might not even be there for certain cameras. So if you don't see that, it's because they don't have calibration stuff for the camera you're shooting with if it's RAW. However, I've got all these options that I just have on my camera, I now have in Lightroom that I can apply afterwards. But look what happens when I go over to the JPEG. I come in and it says my profile is already embedded and I have no other choices because it took and smashed that in and baked it in already. That's the first thing. Now, to be honest, I rarely come down here. I just wanted to let you know that's there. That's one of the big things, the difference between RAW and JPEG. That's not a big deal. This one is a little bit bigger, but it's still not huge. It's not a big hurdle either. Let's go back over to the camera RAW shot right here. I now have, if I go to white balance, one of the first things that you're going to mess with in your photograph, and I click on that menu right there, drops down, I have all these different options that I can change. I can try cloudy, not much change. Let's try tungsten. Yes, I think I've found it. That's the preset I want for the rest of my pictures like this because that's a good look. But here's the thing, you've got all these presets for what's going on with your camera RAW shot. All these options. However, when you come over to JPEG, look what happens. You've only got as shot, auto, and custom. And all custom is saying is you have to control the sliders. You have your choice of sliders. Let's see if I can get it to look somewhat like tungsten. Let's go over here and let's see. I'm going to go daylight, tungsten. How'd I do? Let's see, compare. It's actually a little sharper because it's already got that sharpness baked in from the camera calibration. But, you know, you could, that's the thing with JPEG. You can still adjust everything. You're not limited. It's not like it's stopping you from adding these effects. It's just you don't have quite as much leeway when you're getting an exposure and some things like that. But those are the two things that you can't find in JPEG that you can find in Camera Raw. However, there's a workaround to that. If we go over here and we click on the Camera Raw, and now we come over and we set this, we've got it set for tungsten white balance. Now we can go over, I'm going to open up my presets panel by clicking on it like that. We're going to talk about presets in just a little bit, so don't worry about that. But what I'm going to do is I'm now going to hit plus, this little plus sign next to the presets, and it's going to bring this great big panel that can scare you at first if you're not used to it. Don't worry about it. What we're going to do is we're going to check none down here. A lot of times the default setting when you first come in there, everything's checked like that. But we only want to tweak one thing, so I'm going to hit check none, and I'm just going to turn on white balance. And what presets do is basically make a copy of what your slider settings are and let you replay those over and over again, apply them on top. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to say for the preset name, we're just going to call it tungsten. So what I want to do probably for something like this, I would either name my files white balance tungsten, or what I'm going to do is create a folder with all my white balance settings in there. And I'm just going to hit create, and you see it popped up right there. And so now I'm just going to say all I want is white balance. And process version, we'll talk about that, but yeah, just leave that on and hit create. Okay, so now when I go over to my JPEG, I'm going to come over here and let's reset it. Remember, you can reset and you can undo all day long. This is my original JPEG now. If I come over and I hit tungsten, it's going to apply the tungsten white balance to that photograph. I could go back and do that with all the other ones, daylight, cloudy, or whatever, do that same process. Let me do it one more time so you can see it. Let's do something that shows up. How's fluorescent? We'll just do, we'll do shade. All right, so now I'm going to come over here. I'm going to do plus. Let's change that. Let's give it the name shade, folder white balance. Everything else is set, and I hit create. So now I come over to the JPEG that's set for tungsten, and I just hit shade, and look, it sets it to shade. It's just one click. It applies the white balance to it. So that's the big deal with JPEG and RAW, the two differences that pop up in the develop module. You just have a couple little things that may get you as a JPEG if you're not aware about them, but you also have some workarounds for that. So I hope that gets you understanding what's going on with that. We're going to get into more of the whole processing and developing of that, but that's a place we need to start so you're not wondering about that throughout the rest of the lesson. So hope that helps. Let's jump into the next lesson right now.